Hello and welcome back to my Astronomy Nights. I'm Derek, and in this video I'm looking at Messier 109, a small spiral galaxy in the constellation of Ursa Major. This is one of the later additions to Messier's catalogue, so it didn't appear in his original list and was added in the 1950s. This is a small galaxy, it just shines at about magnitude 9.8, but it is close to the really bright star Gamma Ursa Majoris or Phecda. It's a circumpolar object, so it's available all year round if you're in a northern hemisphere location like myself, and it's a really good target for imaging on long focal length as well as a wider field of view, because you can get that star and those multiple galaxies into the one frame. So let's take a look and see where it's positioned, how it might look in your imaging setup and eyepiece, and who may have discovered it first. To locate Messier 109, if you just get that big asterism of the Big Dipper or the plough and you're looking for the Gamma star, which is that bottom corner of the plough, it's Phecda, and the galaxy just sits less than a degree, so it's only about 40 arc seconds east-southeast of this star. So that's all you have to do to find it. There are other galaxies of interest nearby, one of them being NGC 3953. This one is due south from Phecda, and that's just under a degree and a half due south at a very similar brightness to M109. So Messier 109 is a small galaxy in the constellation of Ursa Major, just measures about 7.5 by 4.5 arc minutes, and it shines at a magnitude of 9.8. It's actually quite a large galaxy. It has a diameter of just about 180,000 light years, so it's nearly twice as large as the Milky Way, and it sits at about 60 million light years from us. There's a group of galaxies around it known as the Messier 109 galaxy group, and this includes some familiar galaxies. There is NGC 3953, which is the Messier 109b, and you also have NGC 3718 and 3729 just to the other side of Phecda, and there's a couple of more little NGC galaxies dotted in around that area, and it can make for a really nice night of observing or imaging if you focus on this area around the bright star of Phecda. Now initially this galaxy was observed in 1781 by Pierre Marchand, and then 2 years later Charles Messier did a follow-up observation on it, but he had his catalogue already kind of printed and ready to go, so he added this in just as an addition to his catalogue. And it wasn't actually until 1953 that astronomical historian Owen Gingrich added this in as Messier 109. There's a little bit of doubt as to whether it was Messier himself who observed this first or Pierre Marchand, because in the 1795 Atlas Celeste there's a marking for the galaxy of the Messier 109, and this was edited, co-edited by Pierre Marchand, and he marked it as being due south of the bright star Phecda. But Messier 109 or NGC 3992 is actually to the southeast or east-southeast of Phecda, so it's in a slightly different position. And the notation that Charles Messier did himself was the right ascension matched one of these objects and the declination matched the other. So it could be the case that Messier was the first one to observe it and that Pierre Marchand actually observed 3953, or Marchand could have observed 3953 and or 3992 and just marked it differently on the atlas. But Henk Brill, a Dutch astronomer, goes into great detail about this. I'll leave a link below and you can read about it, but it's a very interesting story about just one of the Messier objects. So it's kind of come to be known as almost like a dual galaxy object. If you're observing 109, you're going to observe both of these galaxies, and they're really nice to observe, and there's a little bit of contrast between the two, one being slightly brighter and then you have more of that bar structure detail within Messier 109 or NGC 3992. This was also observed later independently by William Herschel in April 12, 1789, and he added into his observations, and it eventually became known as NGC 3992 within that new general catalogue. So NGC 3953, it's a slightly smaller galaxy than M109 at 6.5 by about 3.5 arc minutes, and it has a tilt of about 30 degrees compared to a tilt of around 25 degrees for M109. It's due south from Phecda about just under 1.5 degrees, or south-southwest from M109 at about 1.5 degrees as well, making that kind of triangle with the two other objects. This sits at about 60 million light years from us, and it has a diameter of 130,000 light years. It's slightly dimmer. It's a magnitude between magnitude 10 and magnitude 10.8 if you're checking different charts, but because it's slightly smaller, that light is attenuated and it has a bright core, so it picks up quite well, and it looks like a very similar brightness to M109. This is also a barred spiral galaxy, but the bar at the center is much shorter. You can see it in the photo, just those slight little edges coming out, but the core is much brighter in the eyepiece, so to distinguish those little bars is very, very difficult. It looks more like just a faded oval with that bright center core, and the brightness is very similar to M109, but M109's bar structure is slightly more visible. You can get a hint of it because the core just isn't as bright as NGC 3953. To capture my data on this image, I was using my NEQ6 mount with my 200 PDS on top of it, and I had my QHY 163 mono camera, and I ran my LRGB with ZWO filters. This is the usual setup I used for small faint galaxies, and I think it works quite well on this one. It is small as 7x4, but if you give it enough time you can pull out some of that detail. I was really looking for the detail on the either end of that bar to bring out those little anse or handles at the end of the central bar, so I really focused on getting luminance data on this one first, and I ran just over 6 hours on a pretty good night. It started out cloudy, but I knew it was going to clear up later into the night as Ursa Major was working its way north, and I ran the luminance just in around new moon in December. And then I was able to follow up again in January and get about 1.5 hours of RGB on this target, just to add in a bit of that colour. It's not a huge amount of colour to add in, but it just gives a little bit of contrast to that central bar region for the image. I'm quite happy with it. It's not as sharp as I wanted, but I think it just needs a lot more time to get that sharpness into those arms on this target, because it is quite small at 7.5 by 4.5 arc minutes. And with that bright star Phecda nearby, it's kind of distracting to that top corner of the image. So you kind of crop it tight and you end up with, it's just a little softer than I would like. But I think I'll try it again maybe, or I might even go wider and try to capture 3992 and 3953 in the one image alongside Phecda, which is really nicely framed in a wider field. Observing this target was really good fun because I got out with my large 12-inch Dobsonian to observe this, and I focused on getting NGC 3992 or Messier 108 and 9 primarily in my observations. And when I started out, I got my telescope onto the bright star Phecda. It's magnitude 3.3, really easy to find at the bowl of the Big Dipper. And I ran my telescope south, and by going due south I hit a galaxy, and it was quite faint, and I realized I had gone and observed 3953 is what I had hit in that initial target. So I had made kind of not the same mistake, but I made the same effort in finding the galaxy, and it's quite easy to mix up the two of them. So then I recentered again on Phecda and worked my way to the southeast and got onto Messier 109. It's quite a different target. It's almost that NGC 3953 is slightly brighter, even though it's a much smaller, a much fainter target. It's kind of attenuated light in that bright core makes it easier to spot. But when you're observing Messier 109 or NGC 3992, you kind of give it a little bit more time to tease out some more of that structure. But if you have the time to sit at the eyepiece, you will be able to work out some of that detail in the outer arms. On one side, it's kind of the inner arm on one and the outer arm on the other, and there's a slight bit of that bar structure visible, but it's kind of blown out by a bright core. But if you give it enough time, you should be able to tease out a little bit of that bar structure. The anse themselves are pretty much impossible to observe with my setup. It's extremely faint, but I'm really glad I was able to get it in my image and observe the galaxy itself in around the same time this year. It's really well placed from now right through the summer, but you end up in those shorter nights to observe it. So if you can get out in the spring and give it a look, it's very easy to get distracted by the galaxies in Virgo and Leo when you're out observing now, but if you do get a chance to get on this, it's really well placed. So for my observing sessions of Messier 101, I was mainly using my 12-inch Dob, but I did use my 2 refractors as well just to have some follow-up observation. And the main thing I was looking for was that bar structure within the galaxy. I had a little hint of it. There is quite a bright core, so trying to tease out that little bit of a bar extension either side can be tricky. So I observed these targets over 3 separate nights. I used my 12-inch on 2 nights, and then the other night I used both of my refractors. I was just trying to compare the sizes and the locations of them and how easy it would have been to mistake the 2 of these galaxies when they were first observed. On my first night with the 12-inch, I actually did accidentally observe NGC 3953 when I was trying to locate them for the first time, but once you have observed both of them, it's quite easy to pick them up, especially M109 being so close to Phecda or Gamma Ursa Majoris. 109 is very close to the star Phecda, just about 40 arc minutes away, so it does look kind of like a reflection in your refractor if you have a slower telescope. I was using an f8.3, it's 1000mm focal length, and it does, if you didn't know it was there, you'd have to look at it a few times to make sure it wasn't that kind of reflection that you get of a star just outside of your field of view. The 2 galaxies are slightly different. I think there is a bright core in M101, but it's a little bit more spread out, and you can see a little bit of that arm structure, kind of S shape, just either side of that bright core, and there's a few bright stars sitting around the galaxy, especially there's one on the southern edge. Then with NGC 3953, it's a bit more attenuated, it's slightly smaller with a brighter core, so you don't see as much detail, but you can see kind of a similar shape. It showed up best in my 12-inch. In my refractors then the cores looked very, very similar, especially in my 5-inch. And it wasn't until I was using my 12-inch then that you could see those little differences between both of the galaxies. With my small refractor then, my 82mm, that's a 500mm focal length, you had that slightly wider field of view, and you could just pick them up, but just about, you'd have to be observing them in around new moon. Messier 109 is a great target to observe, and especially if you have large aperture, you can kind of tease out some of that arm and bar structure, and also the fact it's quite close to NGC 3953. It's really nice to do a comparison observation of both of those. If you get a chance to get out and observe or photograph these over the next while, do let me know in the comments, and I'd love to hear about your observation sessions on this target. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, clear skies.